see you in front of them. Paul, thank you for coming. I know that we've been able to chat and I've gotten to take photos at your shows and stuff like this. I was wondering, for folks who don't know who you are, could you just introduce yourself and yeah, what it is you do?
Yeah, my name is Paul Streichan, and I play music, write music, produce music, and going to school for music as well.
Cool. And you're gonna OSU Cascades, is that right?
Yes, I'm at OSU Cascades for some in-person classes,
Yeah.
but I was originally enrolled through the E-campus in the contemporary music industry,
Oh, cool.
bachelor's of art degree.
What are you, I don't know if we've talked about this, maybe briefly. What is it that you're focusing on in that realm?
Yeah, so I'm essentially getting ready to go out into the workplace to potentially either get a career in, they train you to either be a composer or you can be like a mitigator and like a producer sense. Kind of develop critical listening skills, critical analyzing skills in music, develop a broad understanding of the history of music, kind of the sights, sounds, smells, I guess you could call it, of the industry. Yeah.
Absolutely. And do you have a piece of that that really excites you?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of it that excites me is getting to meet other like walks of life as far as musicians. And it's all online, but it all kind of feels like there's still like this tight knit community. For instance, I've met musicians that want to be calypso musicians, and I'm like, whoa, what's that like? And like they live in the Caribbean, and
Right.
so or like with all that dance hall and soca and stuff like that.
For those who don't know, I don't actually know if I know what is calypso.
Calypso is a island Caribbean. It's a genre of music from the Caribbean, usually strong like call and response chants with drums and Caribbean instruments.
Sweet.
Very I'm trying to the Little Mermaid. Do you know Under the Sea?
Oh yeah.
That's calypso.
Oh cool. That's
Yeah.
funny. I never would have known that to call it a certain genre. That's such a good song.
Yeah, yeah.
Dang.
It's like
Oh, I have to
under
go.
the sea. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you specifically, you mostly play the guitar, but do you play other instruments?
I do.
Yeah.
I play bass, piano, ukulele, a little harmonica. I'm not like a great harp player,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what's up. And then as far as bands go, you have the Rum Peppers. Do you want to speak about the projects you're a part of?
Yeah, so I'm in the Rum Peppers. I'm in which is like a rock kind of. We recently started playing more Latin tunes. That's been a lot of fun. And Electric Street Sign, which is kind of this country southern rock group that started with a really good buddy of mine, Joe from Texas. There's Monkey Mode, which is a jazz funk fusion band. That's kind of led by a good buddy of mine, Andrew Bell, who's a wizard on the keyboard. Um, there's another band called FAFO, which stands for Funk Around Find Out, and that's a cool project. We do kind of scary pockets covers and Pomplamoose covers, so um, covers of popular songs but in a funk format.
Oh, cool.
It's yeah, it's a pretty cool project.
I don't
That I'm sorry.
I don't know if I've ever seen anything from that project.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
they we just got some recordings done this like last month or two,
Sweet.
and yeah, it's a really cool project to be in. I really love funk music, and
Yeah.
everyone in the band is so nice and stuff. So
So what do you like about funk music specifically?
ooh, it's kind of just goes back to like James Brown, kind of how I'm a huge fan of improvisation. So James Brown would, just say like, give me a bass line in E, and then he'd be like, watch me now, or like he'd say like the most sporadic impromptu stuff. Like you'd be like refrigerator, and it may make the cut or something. And also he'll be like, take me to the bridge, and then everyone in the band will just be in the middle of something, but then they know what the bridge section of the song is. So like,
That makes sense.
yeah.
It seems like you have to be like, and I think it's one of the things that has impressed me so much about improv music is the like the listening that happens in that, where you have to be ready at like any given moment to whoever's leading to like follow them. Was that something that you had to, or that you felt like naturally inclined to, or is it something you worked to build? Or how do
Ooh,
you feel? Are you good at it?
improvisation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I would say, like one of my more strong suits when it comes to music. That just took a lot of practice
Mm.
and a lot of community building with musicians around. It's a lot of jamming with people that are better than you, people that are at the same level, or like, just starting out, and just kind of creating these bonds, because everyone essentially, especially with guitar, you can have six guitars in a room, and it'll sound different every time. So
It's cool, especially when you get down to like the nitty gritty of like people are using pedals, especially. You get so many different sounds. It blows my mind.
yeah.
How did you get into like music in? Because it seems like you're pretty darn deep into the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a interesting reflection for me to think about. There was a moment in my life when I was about eight or nine, where my mom noticed I wasn't the most adept to being athletic in the sense of like basketball or football, or all those sports. I was kind of like, why am I running lines because someone missed a layup, and I much preferred like skateboarding, surfing, that kind of rock climbing, that kind of stuff. But she was like, well, my son, like, she was like, my son, like, she's like, you need to have something. And she was like, so I'm going to put you in lessons. And I originally was like, okay, I'll learn piano.
Mm.
And she was like, well, we can't do piano because we can't like afford a piano. And I was like, that's all right. And then, so she got me like this nylon guitar with like the wide neck. And she got me some lessons, and I probably took lessons from the age of 8 until I want to say about like a freshman in high school. So it was kind of like, and she every day would mention to me, hey, don't go ride your bike with your friends. Have you practiced yet?
Mm.
And I'd be like, no. And she'd be like, go practice. And it was like 30 minutes a day from 8 years old up until 13, 14.
Was that consistency something that you enjoyed at the time?
Not at all. No, it was kind of like, this is so bunk, man. Like, well, maybe not like 8-year-old Paul was like that, but definitely it was like, I just wanted to go ride my bike and like be outside, and the routine of it. I didn't understand that the routine of things in life kind of sets
Mm.
people up for success, because when I was that young, I just had like this imagination, I wanted to go to Hogwarts type of a thing. And
I relate to that so much. Yeah. How did you see it? Did you see that consistency in that practice? Was that something that like your mom instilled in other areas? And how did that impact other areas of your life, especially as you got older?
yeah, so as I got older, I started using a routine as like a way to develop myself. And of course, like every time, when you're kind of raised one way to have like this schedule and like this routine and how you live your life and how you should structure it, when you slack off on it, you kind of notice it more than if you've never had a routine, where it's like, oh, I haven't played guitar in 2 weeks, and like that feels kind of weird. Kind of something like that. It's definitely bled over in my like early 20s. Definitely, I like fell in love with the idea of routines, and like wake up, eat the same kind of breakfast type of thing, and kind of keeps everything regular in my life.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's funny because it gives you at least I've experienced that, where it gives you a baseline so that you A, know what to return to, and also that when things get wild around you, there's some level of like consistency in like that practice or
E-
to return to.
exactly. I've met a few different people in my life that said don't ever quit guitar. And like these were usually like older guys, and they were like, no matter what, like got the divorce, wife took the kids and the dog, and like I still had my guitar, and I was like, whoa, dude, like I'm like probably like 18, 19 at the time, and I'm like, wow, that's so heavy, but like I guess so true that you know, music really can be that routine or like that one thing that's just always consistent.
That makes sense. And speaking of people, were there people in specific that were like mentors or that really guided you in that process?
Oh
If maybe lessons or musicians in general?
yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I want to say like the most impactful music teacher. Well, I've had probably two really impactful music teachers. One was in high school. His name was McSween.
Mm.
I took like an IB music program through them, and that's kind of where like he showed me kind of ways of like deeply analyzing music. I think we did Summer in Paris by George Gershwin. Very, very like academically dense piece of music to go from like listening to, I don't, what was 18-year-old Paul listening to? Maybe like reggae and who know, like, like stuff like that to like all of a sudden I'm listening to brass sections and they're moving in thirds. What a Picardy third. What's that type of a thing? And, um, but yeah, I had some just I don't know how to describe it, like a rough kind of go of it my senior year, and I was just like, I'm gonna drop out of high school.
Mm.
And he actually was a teacher that was like, you're too smart to be flipping burgers. And I was like, well, like whatever, what do you know? Like when 18 and just kind of full of it, and that was just something that kind of always resonated in my head, where I ended up like going back to school and graduating, going to college, all that stuff. But I I think he was like definitely one of like the most impactful teachers I've had. And I've never gone back to school to tell him that. And I sometimes think I should go back to Bend High and tell him like you really impacted one of your students' lives.
Mm.
The other was a my guitar teacher, Rich Hurdle, and he's still a good dear friend of mine. He moved to Eagle Point, kind of by Medford.
Yeah.
Um, he uh, he was my teacher when I was 19. I joined the jazz band up at CSCC, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I could play jazz. Like I've played, rock and reggae and this stuff my entire life, and then I was so wrong. So, and he was like, you really lucked out. Like I was the jazz guy, and what I loved about going to lessons with him was he would turn the lesson sometimes into like 15 minutes of just life experience, because he was I think in his 60s at the time. So he'd give me advice on like what it means to just be like a good human, not just like be a good guitarist.
Mm. Were there any like specific lessons that felt powerful in that? I'm sure there were many, but
Yeah, yeah, one lesson he had me say, like, he's like, I want you to say that you're great. And I was like, I was like, yeah, I'm good. And he's like, no, I want you to say that you're great. And I was like, okay, I'm great. He's like, now say you're great at guitar. And I was like, okay, I'm great at guitar. And then he's like, good. Now don't be cocky. And I was like, what does that mean? And the more I kind of reflected on it, the more I realized that we we put these metaphorical ceilings on us where we tell ourselves we can only be this good, and we could actually be higher than our ceiling, and like just looking outside in, like we don't know every kind of like how people are like, wow, that person's so great, and they don't see it, type of a thing.
mm.
So it's like a matter of telling yourself that you're great at what you're doing, and like having that confidence, but not being so cocky that someone says you're great and you're like, I know, or kind of like a jerk about it or something in
Yeah.
that regards.
In that way, you're like trying to toe the line of humility, or you're deep in humility, but also not in a way that shies away from talent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about it's not thinking less about myself, but it's thinking about myself less.
I gotta write that one down. That's a cool way to say it, but yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned like it seems like you are pretty reflective in that. Are there any practices that help you, or like in your routine, kind of cultivate that?
Yeah, just my like mindfulness.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, every day I do yoga in the morning. It's like the first thing I do after some creative writing, sensory based object writing, and that kind of helps me keep a meditation for the day of um, I can reflect on maybe the things that went well yesterday and didn't go well, and I'm like, okay, like that didn't go well because I maybe spent too much time, on my phone, or there was a real page turner of a book, and because of that, like I have stuff to do today, I have grocery, and then it kind of puts you in the place of not thinking too far ahead, but then just being presently in the moment and kind of like, where am I sitting right now? Is my Are my shoulders tense today? And then as you go through the day, you can sometimes feel your shoulders creep up, and it's like being aware of that to kind of just relax them down. It really helps.
Mm. Does that mindfulness practice impact your playing?
Ooh, um, I'd say so in the way that sometimes I sit down with the intent of I'm like, okay, I have like 30 minutes, so I'm just gonna practice something, and then it'll just something will just flow out of it, and I may end up writing something.
Mm.
Or sometimes it is just 30 minutes of practicing scales and arpeggios and modes or whatever, and then some days it's like I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes and it feels like pulling teeth.
Mhm.
And Sonny Rollins has like this great example about how as an artist, you sort of need to fall in love with the frustrations of the practice itself. Kind of like how bodybuilders are like in love with just being sore, kind of.
Absolutely, it makes sense. I think of that a lot actually because I think for a long time, and a lot of people, I would assume that don't have a practice that's consistent, um, kind of think that there's a point where it just becomes easy or something like this.
Mhm.
And it seems, at least with my stuff, the more and more it's not about it becoming like easy or like fun or pleasurable all the time. It's that you learn to, yeah, move through and still show up when it's hard.
Yes.
Is there, I guess it goes back to the consistency thing, but I'm sure there are days where you just don't want to show up. How do you, or is there a thing that gets you like back to your guitar?
Ooh, yes. Sometimes the pressure of it all kind of builds up, and there's self-doubt, worry, anxiety, any of that kind of stuff can always creep in,
Mm.
just outside world stuff. Um, Sometimes as simple as taking like a walk or like listening to some music that I really love, or a good conversation with a friend, something that may even just get me out of like myself, kind of helps me get back to music,
Mm.
because more oftentimes than not, if like it's not my guitar's fault I don't want to play it, like there's got to be something going on my insides.
Mm. It's funny. I think about that a lot with the "it's not you, it's me."
Yeah.
But when it's like an inanimate object, it like can't be them, right?
100%. No, 100%.
Oh, it's wild. Um, what is your because we talked about it a little bit, but your process of writing your own music, like, yeah.
Yeah, so that varies. I have a lot of different methods. Sometimes, it's there's there's this idea that sometimes you can just sit down and tell yourself I'm gonna write a great song right now,
Mm.
and then nothing. It's like a wall, or like the term writer's block, just just kind of hits you. Then there's other times where I sit down not with the intent of writing anything at all, and I just try some new sequence, or um, I hear a song and I'm like, oh wow, I've never thought of, I haven't thought of doing that chord progression in a while, and
Mm.
kind of transpose it or move it around or however. And then, sometimes words will just come in, or sometimes licks will come out. Sometimes I will just put on a drumming track, and just that kind of just opens up a world of like anywhere you can go. Sometimes you can put on a backing track to something. I really like playing blues sometimes when I'm just wanting to kind of mess around with improvisation. And for songwriting, I've done the method where you kind of just set up a voice recorder and kind of like Eminem and 8 Mile just freestyle something, and you know, you click it and you're like, that was rubbish, but then you hear it a week later and you're like, whoa, there was like 2 seconds 5 different times in that 3 minute video where that may have something.
It's funny that you say that because I also do the voice recording thing, but I really struggle with going back to listen to it. How do you relate to that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I try to save all playbacks like first thing in the morning, usually after or before my yoga and free writes,
Mm.
just because my brain's fresh, and then it's like there isn't like the jargon of the day, or like the ambulance you hear that went by just kind of like does something to your ears where all of a sudden by the end of the day your ears are a little flat.
Mm.
Kind of like, I think it's silly, but some of like the best concerts I've ever seen, or not concerts, but like jam musicians, or like in other like Puerto Rico and stuff, it was all like brunch music. Like probably just woke up and like they're drum circles and having fun, and it's because like the brain's just firing on all
Yeah.
cylinders.
And it's like completely fresh too. That's interesting. And then it as far as that goes, do you then like take those pieces and try to like mold them into a more complete song, or does it go into like a kind of a reservoir that you can pull from the recordings?
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. So sometimes, yeah, it'll be like an idea, and then I'm like, oh, that's a good idea, and then I'll write it down, and I'll write down the chord progression, and then I'll sit there and then I'll try to base a song around that line. And I'm like, maybe this is the chorus, you know, and then something will lead to another,
Mm.
and then kind of using different tools to kind of get to where you maybe want to go with it. You know, I think some of the most popular songs are usually to do with love or loss of love or finding love, you know, anything in like the realm of love, kind of like all the club songs, looking for someone to dance with, or you lost someone that you used to dance with, you know, never gonna dance again. Like it all kind of relates. Or there's like, you know, do I want to write a funny song? I have a funny song about baking a cake that I thought it was like this kind of sexy innuendo, but I like also talked about like, yeah, it's like the indictment charges of like Martha Stewart, and like, you know, I'm like, oh man, this is really funny when I'm writing it, and I'm like, wow, I love Martha Stewart, but like I hope she like never hears this though and like thinks I'm dogging on her, but
I really want to hear that song now.
yeah.
Do you feel like any of the, or like, how do you know, and do you feel like your songs are finished?
Ooh, you know, I've heard a good topic about this, and I felt it. Usually I'll know a song is done when there's stuff that I feel like I could keep adding to it. A lot of producers out there would know the rabbit hole of like looking for snares, or they're like, my snare's trash, and it's like, just like move past the snare, save that for like whoever's gonna, you know, master it or mix it. And but I think for me, I get hit with this wave of like, it's done, and it's like almost kind of like this, like not like a sadness, but kind of like that feeling, that the closest other feeling I've had is like hiking a mountain, and you get to the top and you're like, whoa, this is a beautiful view, and then it's like, but I gotta walk back down and I gotta go to the next mountain.
Mm.
And that's just kind of the feeling I get from finishing a song, because you get to the top of the mountain and you're like, oh, this song's done. You listen to it, you're like, yes, and then you're like, next song.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like the piece of that has to do with consistency, especially right now. Um, I guess like as society at large, maybe. I don't know. I try not to paint with too many broad brush strokes, but that concept of like instant gratification
Mm.
and also like working to the end goal, how has that practice of consistently reaching end goals in music impacted other parts of your life?
Yeah, so there have been moments where things in life where it was really satisfying to chase that instant gratification, and and it's still easy to fall like trapped to some of those things. For instance, like I used to drink for years, and I
Mm.
loved drinking, and it like almost killed me. And I haven't drank in over 2 years now, but that was something where every time I drank, I thought it was making some part of me better with the music because I just didn't care. I was like, oh, it's art. I don't care. I'm gonna just put it out there. But I listened to some of those old recordings, and I'm like, oh boy, like, oh, I can't believe that's on SoundCloud type of a thing.
Yeah.
So that was how, like, I guess the instant gratification kind of worked towards that. There's other times where sometimes I feel like we as humans sometimes chase the acceptance train where we think other people's approval of us is going to somehow make it worthwhile. And I feel like with art, it's all a matter of what you're doing in yourself.
Mm.
So if you make this song and it's about she broke my heart and took the dog and the truck
And the truck.
and the truck, the flatbed truck, and it's this beautiful country song, and it makes you feel better, and you show it to people and they're like, I don't get it, then that's okay because you get it and you get the fact that it helped you feel better, and you're like, well, I got my emotions down on paper and kind of expressed myself in this audible medium.
Mm.
I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, it's interesting because it brings me to another thought, which is like, how do you balance, obviously, and it kind of also ties into like, what is I don't know if end goal is the right word for it. So this is kind of a two-part question, which is like, what is your vision of how you want your music to exist in regards to how you live your life, like lifestyle wise? And also, how do you balance that piece of it? Because there's an inherent piece of like your art has relative value because it's being perceived, but it's like meaningful and is art because of the value that you place on it. Does that make sense?
yeah. So I guess there's some music that I've put out, especially with Zeus and the Rum Peppers, where there was like this moment where I was like, well, what is the music that we're doing and what's its impact? Because like for a bit there, I thought we were just kind of like this party band, and I think like we still kind of get in that niche of like kind of like people party at our shows. But I think there have been times where uh people have openly said to him or me like, hey, that song like really kind of like changed my life. Like I was going through something, and it was like, and I don't know if I'm answering the question right, but it was almost as if like an experience of an adverse experience, kind of like adversity, and then you share it as like this art form or some kind of way that reflects how you're feeling and how you want maybe someone else to feel from your song. And then maybe you hit the nail on the head, or maybe you're completely off, and this sad song really makes people happy. I think of the band The Fray. Like if you go to their Spotify, it's like every song is just like the saddest thing, how to save a life, something to you. Can't remember the names of them right now, but those were, I think, songs that um, have this aid memoir. We Which an aid memoir is kind of how we hear that one song and it brings us back to this one memory. Kind of how that's why happy songs can have sad aid memoirs, because it's like, oh, I shared this moment with my partner at this one time in my life, and like that song will never be the same. Or it can be a good aid memoir. Like anytime I hear Tayo Cruz, like Dynamite, I'm just like thrown back to middle school dance. I'm like, what is going on?
God, it's such a throwback.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Oh, and what's the phrase there you said? Aid memoir?
Oh yeah, aid memoir.
Where does that come from? Do you know?
That so I learned about that in a critical understanding critical music.
Mm,
And essentially the brain is so powerful that we pick up signals and signs and or as my buddy Joe says, like smoke signal carrier pigeons and stuff. We pick up stuff from our universe constantly that we maybe don't even recognize. And that's why like you go to a bar or a coffee shop and you share like this really awesome beautiful moment with someone, or like this awesome experience. You see an amazing concert and it's like this song just like aids that in you, and it's kind of like next thing you know it's winter time and you hear that song and it brings you back to Hayden Homes at the amphitheater, and all of a sudden it's like you feel warm and like get like flush kind of
mm.
a way.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm curious what the physiological or like psychological like internal processes in that, like
Mm.
why it leaves that kind of timestamp. Do you know any of like the kind of science behind it?
No, I mean,
It's fascinating.
I'm sure I could like find you the article
Yeah,
and the chapter we were reading about it.
like the best guess.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. There's so many songs that uh you can almost like trigger emotions
Hmm.
in a way by um right, like pulling up the song, say you're like in a sad mood. If you listen to a bunch of happy songs, you're not guaranteed to be happier because it could kind of do the opposite.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a bad
Yeah.
example, but there is way I do think in that there's a lot of power in how music impacts like how we think almost,
Hmm.
or how we're like perceiving the world. Have you ever like tested that out?
Oh yeah. I mean, like one of like the best examples is "I Miss You" by Blink 182. Like how many times does that come on at a party? That's like one of the saddest songs if like you really listen to it, but it's like everyone's like, "Where are you?" Like everyone's just smiling and happy. And it's that artist was probably someone who wrote that with the intent of, like this is a sad experience I'm going through, yada yada, spider webs, I miss you.
Mm.
And we perceive it as like this great throwback. It's like, oh man, that brings me back to middle school, and middle school was such a simpler time. I didn't have to worry about anything but going to school, and triggers all those responses. Kind of like the same psychology behind, sometimes like people can't eat something again after they get food poisoning.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like maybe like there's music that really rubs people the wrong way.
Mm.
And
And in some ways, like the body's remembering that memory. Huh.
exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting because it's yeah, it's the same like sensory, well, it's a piece of the sensory experience. And I haven't really heard it much in music, but it's interesting because yeah, with like food, I guess the pain is so great related to the experience that you don't want to associate with it again.
Right.
And almost to the opposite effect, like if the music has such a like positive, powerful experience, or in some cases like sad experiences, like it creates that like imprint.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, and that's why, if your song is I don't know, "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey, with, a partner, you have a life, you share this beautiful moment, and then y'all, move apart. There's always going to be a part that hears that song and is like, oh man, and it brings that back. But then the beauty of, I guess, like kind of in Buddhism is knowing that like suffering is in everything, but only because the idea of understanding that everything is suffering is how we like actually free ourselves from our bondage of the disillusions. And eventually you'll hear that song and it'll aid maybe the memoir, and then you'll be but then you'll be like, it's such a good song, and then you remember like maybe the happy times within a sad moment, or a maybe like a traumatic experience, kind of how sometimes people with trauma remember traumatic experiences differently. And it's because the brain is this super powerful organ, and we hear stuff that we maybe don't even pick up. And I think it has to do with like evolutionarily, we were designed to essentially tune out certain frequencies and rustling bushes, for instance, because if our brain wasn't perceiving rustling bushes that were always moving, we'd be sensory overload and we wouldn't notice the tiger that's actually behind us breaking branches.
Mm.
You know, that's where our ears are trained to hear, oh, that new thing behind us, there's a tiger or something.
It's really funny because uh there was a time I used to do a ton of like backpacking, and like I was out on this it was like a 12-day, I think 12 or 14. It might have been longer, but let's go with that. Um this like backpacking in southern Utah in this incredibly beautiful, to this day, the most beautiful gulch I've ever been in. Um and I totally forget the name of it. Incredible canyon walls. And there was one point where there's no water. And um like for that long you like go and find a water like spot, and you like fill up your drums. So we have these like 10-liter drums, and we'd haul them back to camp. And we ended up um I guess the weird part was that I'd actually been in that same canyon 2 years prior on a different trip for almost the exact same length of time in a very similar route. And so I'd seen it when it was really beautiful and lush and had this like flowing river coming through this canyon, and it was like this whole thing. So I was like so hopeful. And then the 2 years later is incredible. The entire landscape had dried up so significantly that it was like a completely different um it felt like a completely different place, even though it was still incredibly beautiful. And essentially it was me and these three other folks, and we had to hike 7 miles to get to a water spot, because there was like supposed to be water somewhere and there wasn't, because we're like reading maps too, like we don't have GPSs. And it was, I've studied outdoor education in college, and so it was like this wild experience. So we finally get the water, and then one thing led to another, and it turns out I was like the only person that had a headlamp coming back, and it was like
Oh,
it started to get dark out, and it was this like really dry, desolate place, and we're hauling like um I mean 10 liters of water is like, it's pretty damn heavy. And so each person has like two of them or one of them, I forget, but it was like a significant amount because we had another stretch of, I don't know, 20 miles or something to go. Because we didn't know where there'd be water, so you have to like prepare to go like the longest distance.
yeah.
And it's funny from the sensory perspective, because when we were walking back, um, you're it was so dry that all of the brush is like crackling. And there was this moment where there was like something else, and it was just clearly moving faster than us, but it was dark out, and I was the only one with a headlamp. It was moving faster than us, and it was definitely heavier than the way that we were stepping on the brush. And it's interesting thinking back to that, which to a degree, I don't remember what it sounded like for us to be walking on through that path.
Yeah.
But you better believe that I remember how it sounded for, I don't know what it was. It could have just been a deer, but it definitely was like following us.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it was a really hilarious one, but it's just wild to think about that, of how, and in looking back, how differently my brain responded to the way that the sound was.
Mm-hmm.
That all of us were like, we were freaked out. Like we were scared it was like a mountain lion that was going to attack us, which, you know, it might have been, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
That's a really long aside, but that's like, I might cut that out, but that's like such a wild story.
No, that's a great, and that's, we evolutionarily we've adapted our ears to be like that, because we have, we have prey ears.
Mm.
They're on the sides, so
Yeah.
we got attuned to that, and because you were walking and you probably eventually tuned it out, kind of like walking on snow. You eventually kind of just tune it out. But then as soon as you hear something else, you're like, oh no, that's not my footsteps. Like, and like definitely probably get, yeah, I could imagine at night with a headlamp going.
Oh, dude, it was freaky. We definitely like turned around, and my friend had like a knife that he pulled out and was like prepared to like fight a giant cat. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh my god.
Like, it was wild. And I guess we were also on day like 7 of 14 or something like this. So there's a lot of things at play. And, you know, it's like, oh, so silly. It was a really long day. But I guess it's interesting, I guess, bringing it back. I'm curious, you mentioned some kind of like Buddhist wisdom in there. What's your relation? This is a bit of like a jump back, but what's your relation to, I guess, that as spirituality or like the religion in general, and how does that impact
Oh yeah.
um like how you exist, or like when did you find it
Oh
kind
yeah.
of? Yeah.
It was a rainy day back in no, no, I I was raised Catholic for a number of years in my life, and I just kind of like for years kind of used to go to bed doing like the prayers, praying at supper, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And then it was like one day it just kind of fizzled out. Like both of my mom was never the Catholic one, my dad was, and then one day it just fizzled out. Like all of a sudden, we didn't have to practice religion anymore, and I was like, sweet. So
Mm.
I didn't, and then I guess I for a bit I called myself an atheist, and I was like, yeah, or I was non-secular. I was kind of under the impression that like there was no experience, very kind of nihilistic, I think, viewpoint for someone like for me at the time to have. And eventually I kind of developed this idea that there had to be something out there, because I could, the way it was worded to me is like I could try to go out in the ocean and I could try to stop a wave from happening, but it's still going to happen. And that is just further solidifying that I am not the most powerful thing in the universe. And that's, I guess, kind of where we were talking earlier about humility kind of
Mm.
comes in, and kind of understanding like, okay, I'm not, the creator of the universe around me. I can't control people, places, and things. The only thing I do have control over is myself.
Mm.
And I think that that's kind of where I only recently started practicing a with Buddhism with a mentor who's kind of been taking me through the heart of the Buddhist teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's great because there's a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, dude, I don't get this. And he practiced Zen meditation over in Eugene for years. Yeah, I'm also in Funk Around and Find Out with him. He's the bass player. He's like one of my really best friends and mentor, and yeah, so it's one of those things where I started discovering maybe the things that would maybe bug me about myself or other people was usually deeply rooted in something to do with just me.
Mm.
And it's kind of like practicing that mindfulness, kind of like that mindfulness you get in from music, kind of, and that kind of stems into what I was talking about with Rich, kind of like being like, oh man, like of course like there's like a part of me maybe that like wants to like post a song that like everyone loves and it like changes someone's life. But also at the same time, I just gotta feel okay with not getting the validation and just validating from an internal source of just being like, I wrote this song for me. I like this song. I'm gonna put this song out there. And, if they take, they take.
Mm. Do you ever get caught up in um the external validation?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, it's that's really hard not to, when someone's like, "You're awesome," and it's really hard to not. But that's where you gotta, for I guess for anyone out there, like there's this ego in you that kind of wants to be like, "Yes, feed me. Yes, I need all the compliments, or I need someone to tell me like I'm great." And then there's like the internal one where it's like, do I need someone to tell me I'm great, or do I like because I actually don't feel great? And do I need all this validation from this thing that I'm doing, and like, I'm standing on my head like juggling bowling pins and playing the harmonica, like, which I mean would be badass. Don't,
Epic.
yeah, I know, but like, if am I doing that just to like get people to like me because I don't like myself?
Mm.
And I think that's where like a lot of the validation kind of stems from. And which is, I think anyone, especially an artist, wants like, oh yes, marvelous, like, ah, yes, I just love this, and you're
Mm.
like, really? I painted that, or I made this.
It's something that's tripped me out a lot where people like there's something incredible about art, which is saying like you will like pay or want to see or like will listen to my song every day. And like that's something that came from just my mind. I don't even know. I get so tripped out on it because you think about that and it's a bit obscene. It's like, oh, I just had this thought or I played this riff and then I put this chorus behind it and now like a million people or even like 1,000 or like 100 people have listened to it and they've thought it was cool to relate to it.
Yeah.
Um, how I guess the piece of mine that's interesting, well, that was not really a sentence, but the thing that's interesting to me that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is like it sounds like you want to be like a teacher of music. And I think we've talked about this before. How or like why is that, first of all? And second, like how does that impact your goals in the music that you're putting out? Or does it change them?
Right. So I actually had a talk recently with my mentor about this, where he was mentioning maybe me wanting to be a teacher to maybe validate some part of myself that maybe feels unworthy and feeling like I need to do this to like prove to myself that I'm intelligent or whatever it is, worthy of an education, yada yada. And I think for me, the only time I ever felt like I truly understood something was when I taught it to someone else. And I think and it's been proven, you don't retain lectures just by looking at someone talk about, the murder of, Julius Caesar. You've learned a little bit more taking actual hand notes, and then beyond that, you learn more from like a video that you can rewatch and take notes on, and then the most you learn from is teaching someone else. And I think like the idea behind being a teacher would potentially be a career that I I would love to share the joy that music has given me with other people, and I would love to do it in a way that is coming from a place of a pure heart and with like the utmost intention of
Mm.
being just as real as I can be.
That makes sense. And then so and I guess the piece of that from there is uh what would success look like to you as a musician?
Ooh. Yeah, so success to me as a musician is, I think, ultimately being happy, because I've experienced it maybe minorly, just like thinking, okay, like I'm gonna be happy once I can play for a really large crowd. And then I played for a really large crowd, and then it was like afterwards getting hit with like this sadness. I was like, man, I thought that's what I wanted. Like, why don't I feel better about it?
Mm.
And it's like kind of like that famous thing where people tell you like you can chase money, and once you get it, all you wish you had is that time back. So it's like finding that balance. If that answers that question.
Absolutely. No, I think it's so important. It's what the more I talk to artists, the more that hits home for me, which is it's kind of like um when the grass is always greener, like the grass is always greener, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is interesting
In the
because
other fellow's yard. Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Because it's like yeah, maybe it's you're going full time in tour and you're like missing being stable in a community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you're stable in the community and then you're, tempted by all of those things. And it seems like this kind of elegant balance of appreciating what you currently have and knowing what pieces you want to incorporate
Mm-hmm.
and how to make that sustainable. Especially from like a financial place, which is saying like
Right.
the numbers also have to make sense, right? And that's a piece where, um, yeah, it's intimidating, especially as an artist, because at least I think so, where it's like someone needs to say that it has value for it to have value.
Right. Yeah, I'm reminded of last summer. We started this thing that just ended up taking off more than we thought, which was going to be busking. And I had like this idea for years. I was like, I just want to busk. Like that just seems like the way to do it. And then I met Joe, and Joe's just absolutely loves working with music, and like he's all about doing it as like a means for a career,
Mm.
which is, it's nice to, meet other people that are, you meet people in any artsy career that are extremely driven to be like, to keep like their ceiling, like they aren't at their ceiling because their ceiling, they don't have one, like they're just like sky's the limit, like let's go to Thailand, we're gonna sing honky tonk tunes in Thailand, and like we'll make money, we'll get a moped, a Vespa, and we'll just travel around. Like there's like those kinds of musicians, and I think that's like kind of, how some people may measure success. Some people measure success by record sales. Some people measure success, but the money that you have to make from it is a hard thing because you got to eat. And kind of like you were saying, grass is always greener. I think there's like a part of it with music where if for whatever reason all you have is time to make music, all of a sudden it's not this thing that you cherish as much.
Mm.
Kind of like you really cherish music more when you get off of work or from a day of school learning about, I don't know, Pythagorean theorem. I don't know if they still teach the kiddos that or whatever. Like a day of just that, and then you get home and then you get to sit at your piano and play some chords, and you're like, "Ooh, I like that." And you record it, and then it turns into something. And then the next day you're like, oh man, like that antsy feeling of like Christmas where you're like, I just want to work on that recording, but I'm at work. Man, I hate this place. Can't wait until I get out of the establishment. But then, the day that you do get out of the establishment, and then it's all of a sudden, you're like, oh yeah, I want to work on that recording. And then you go to work on it, and then you work on it for a bit, and then you're like, kind of this stems back into the start of our, which is, how do you make yourself kind of sit something down to do something, where some people believe art is something that should just happen at like a spur of the moment.
Mm.
Some people think, I love Jerry Seinfeld. He has a crazy work ethic. He has this theory that there's no such thing as writer's block. There's only laziness and just not and not doing it. And I was like, wow,
Huh.
that is so true, because theoretically anyone could sit down and just start writing. It's possible. It could be words that, I got table, and or something, and then it's not gonna, it may not sell records, it may not have success on like the charts or get a sync licensing deal or all that stuff, but it may bring validity to like that person of like, wow, my first song I wrote, I got table. And then it's like the second one is like all of a sudden like I got a plant on a table and the shadow casts on my mug. And then it's like, okay, I'm getting a little deeper in my songwriting. And then song 3, it's kind of like just writing it, even though it's maybe you don't think it's good, or maybe you think it's great and no one else does. And that's, I personally never had that, but I've met some people that, they thought like their music was like the best thing in the world. And I was like, man, that confidence is awesome.
Absolutely. And do you believe that in the Jerry Seinfeld way of like there is no such thing as writer's block?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think anytime I feel like I have writer's block, that's especially when I need to just write out whatever's on my mind. Because usually it's something that I'm like, ooh, do I really want to write that? And I'm like, no, do I really want people to know that about me? Like singing Avril Lavigne in the shower? Like, do I want people to know I do that? And I'm like, who cares? That kind of stems back into what other people may think of you or whatever.
It's funny that you say that because I noticed that in my own stuff as well, especially when it comes to routine, which is I try to like meditate and write every morning and work out. And it's funny because it's usually the times when I'm being most avoidant of those things that when I sit down to do it, even if it's just sitting down to meditate for 20 minutes, like some of the most interesting thoughts or concepts that I've thought of or processing events come from those times where like every part of my being was like all of a sudden I'm cleaning. I hate cleaning.
Yeah.
But I'm cleaning instead of sitting, right? And it's fascinating because the moment that you kind of push through that resistance, at least in my experience too, is often the kind of opening up again. I don't know what that's about, but it feels significant.
Oh yeah, there is something magical that happens to the human condition when we do things that we don't want to do because it's maybe uncomfortable, or I think about all the times people are like, "Hey Paul, come out and hang," and I'm like, dude, I just want to sit at home and watch How I Met Your Mother and drink tea, or read a book or something. And I'm like, fine, I'll go out. And I go out and I'm like, man, what am I doing out here? I don't really want to hang out or anything. And then it's in those moments that I actually have like a really good time. And I was like, wow. And then I feel like such a uh, opinionated person. I'm like, I can't believe I almost didn't go out. I just had one of the greatest times in a while.
It's so true. Yeah, I know. It's funny because sometimes I think there's this really we talk a lot about like at least like the circles that I'm in, like knowing yourself and like knowing what you want or what you need. And I think there's a degree of that, and there's a degree of like sometimes like you don't know maybe, or maybe it's in the process of doing things that are uncomfortable where you start to realize like, oh, it did make a difference for me to go out, even though I didn't want to. And that becomes like more data to build of saying, well, okay, when I'm feeling like that, maybe it is important to like go have,
Mm-hmm.
at least have the chance of having an epic night or something.
Exactly. No, that is exactly how it ends up working. And that's usually how it'll sometimes work out with music. Sometimes I really like want to finish a song and I like open it and I listen to 30 seconds and I'm like, nope, I'm gonna work on another one. Or sometimes, it'll be like this random sporadic energy where I'll be like, I have some energy. I'm gonna go write a bunch of like Charles Bukowski poetry and like chop up the lyrics and then put them in a hat and draw them and make a song that way. Kind of like David Bowie and John Lennon used to do that. Um, and it's really cool how we sometimes think we need to do something, and that's like a balance I still haven't really found out. The way that recently my mentor described it to me is like two roads. If I drink a fifth of tequila right now, I'm going to feel like shit tomorrow. If I don't, I'm going to feel good. If I wake up tomorrow and I don't feel good, I can't play the card of like, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Because you totally knew it was going to happen.
Exactly. You knew it was. No one's ever, maybe like when you're very young, you can do that, but
It is funny because there's a degree of um understanding future consequences that comes into play there, which I think, and I don't know if that's just me. It took quite a long time for me to like have that perspective and to slow down enough to say, okay, what is the impact of this action in tomorrow, in 2 weeks, in 3 months, right? And there's no way of knowing for certain, but there are certain ones that you can,
mm-hmm.
right? Which is saying, if I drink too much, I will be hungover tomorrow. This is not, there was no, maybe when I was 16, there was this miracle where I woke up and felt fine.
Yeah.
The majority, like, there's a 95% chance I'm gonna feel terrible. Oh man, yeah.
100%. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And like sometimes it's those little wins every day. Sometimes it's like knowing, man, I really don't want to sit down and do meditation. But I know if I don't do it, it's going to be later in the day and I'm going to be like, I should have done that. But also it's like, oh, I'm stressed out on this and that. And then the mind, you don't get to tell yourself, oh, I don't know why I feel this way. Because in your mind, you're like, I skipped my meditation. Or for me, I skipped my yoga, and that's why I feel like I didn't get my practice in today. And well,
there's so much of that. And I think that's the core of like taking responsibility for ourselves too.
Oh, 100%.
And it's been wild, the impact that has. And I think this whole concept of like, it is to be you're lying to yourself, right? You're not in integrity if you don't show up to your practice, and then later in the day, I think it's where like guilt maybe gets a bad rep, where it's saying it's not something to like spiral about, but it's something to notice and say, totally, I promised myself I would show up, and then I didn't, and now I feel this way about it. And then
Exactly.
trying to use that as data for the future to say, if I don't show up for my practices, I'm most likely going to feel bad about it. And
Yeah.
therefore, in that moment of like, do I sleep in for an extra 30 minutes or,
Mm.
right, like show up and do some yoga or meditate?
Right.
Um, that like motivating thought. It's interesting. It comes from, I've been on a couple meditation retreats, and um, there was one where we did this practice where we stood and you just stand for a really long time because it's like the entire day, right?
It's like a
And
board,
you
like.
you stand and your only job is to notice the thought that convinces you to sit down.
Whoa, that's pretty powerful stuff.
It's wild, and it's really interesting because I think about that when I'm like laying in bed. Yeah, I forget what was it, like Aristotle or something that said like it's just laziness like to lay in bed for longer than you need to. Um or Marcus Aurelius or one of those guys. And it was interesting like standing at that meditation just to notice the thought that either motivates you to sleep in longer or to get up and go to your practice or to sit down or to like stand for a little longer. And at what point it's helpful and beneficial and what point it's like harmful because you can't stand forever,
Yeah.
right? You also can't sleep forever. So at a point you have to like participate. Um I guess the question I want to ask that comes from that is like, what keeps you motivated or showing up?
Oh yeah.
Or is it the just to be consistent?
Yeah, I mean, well, like there is consistency, but I guess there's other things that keep me motivated. Sometimes it's and like this is all through like experience and life experience. I've nothing is like in my opinion more embarrassing than like going to a lesson and you don't practice what you were supposed to that entire week, and then you go to the lesson again and it's like Groundhog Day. And that was great. That was what was great about Rich. Like he'd
Mm.
be like, "This is like Groundhog Day. Like you didn't do it. You didn't." Like, I know, I know, I know. And then like that week, it's like overcompensating. Oh, just hard in it. Like, yes, I'm doing it, and then I show up like so proud of it. And like there's some part of like that where it's good to feel like, oh man, I did that and I accomplished something, even though like the progress is so slow. I think I see it a lot with people that want to learn an instrument and they buy one, they're going to do it. They got like the YouTube or maybe they got a teacher and then they do it and then they realize that they're not Jimi Hendrix playing with their teeth in a week. So they're just like burn out and they don't understand that like Jimi Hendrix had like, I think he started playing at like 10 or something and, just every day playing, got in bands, start playing with, you get out. Other people kind of help with, I think, me getting out of my funk sometimes,
Mm.
or, because like you can play alone in your room all you want, but then sometimes it's not applicable to actually like being in a room of a circle with guys and gals and like you're all making eye contact and looking at each other, trading off ideas,
Mm.
kind of becoming like this atmosphere. That's kind of why like I just learned about the steel pan in the Caribbean and how the guy basically talks about the steel pan isn't just music, it's like a community building. It's this exercise that essentially it's all inclusive, because a steel drum is basically like looks like a 55-gallon drum, the bottom of it, and then they cut it like the skirt, and it kind of goes down in a bowl, and you hit it, and makes like those really cool like boom
Mm.
noises. And he was saying how that doesn't require very much, if at all, any dexterity compared to like someone wants to learn guitar, they have to learn how to like the muscle memory of how their hand fits on a fretboard and how you need theory and then you need to tune it every time you play it and all these different trainings and like skills that go into how to even play guitar and get a good sound. You can like get a good sound from a steel drum that day just by hitting it, and it's all inclusive in the way that someone can come up and look over their shoulder and be like, "Can I?" And then they're like, "Yeah, copy me." Do like dum 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 dum, and kids like dum 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 dum. It's like, you're a steel pan man, and it's yeah, it's beautiful. Kind of kind of stems in. I love like the theories of evolution, but music is one of those things I think that has innately been like this really primitive thing that became like a bonding experience. And
Mm.
it's kind of like how they have people in the military march and like one, two, three, and it's to build syncopation with each other. So it's like you have like this rhythm, this circadian rhythm with one another. So like you
Mm.
develop this adverse connection in a way.
Oh man, I'm so curious from the like psychological perspective like how that impacts the way that a community relates to each other. Because there is something incredible about the bond of people who play music together. Or in the case, like even marching is a form of music, right? And so the like bond that you create in playing with other people and how it continues to motivate and grow. And I mean there is something, anyone who's been to a concert, right, especially a big concert, is like they're in the same wavelength and having this experience
Oh yeah,
together.
and yeah, and similar certain concerts, for instance, like you'll go and everyone has a cowboy hat and boots, and like very like similar niche and style, and you go to metal shows, everyone's like in all black and kind of thing, and it's really you go to salsa bands and everyone's there to dance, and like a community of kind of doing that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. Yeah.
God, yeah. There's so many pieces that um I want to talk about. I guess the biggest thing I want to ask you, not to like pull off to the rails too much,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
is there
However
anything
we need
that
to wrap it up.
um you like want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if anyone out there's listening to this that really wants to do music,
Mm.
just remember that you totally can, and it's totally feasible. And sky's the limit. The consumer didn't know they wanted Jimi Hendrix. No one knew they wanted Jimi Hendrix, but they got him. And it's kind of like that with any other music. No one knows what is gonna be until it is being done. Kind of, I like Rick Rubin's idea. Like, no one's gonna make your art for you, and there's some sort of an idea that we have that will die with you. And there's this motivational speaker I love. His name's Les Brown, and he talks about the idea of when we pass away, we are surrounded. What if we were surrounded by all the great thoughts that we didn't act on? And that keeps me up at night sometimes. Not that I think I'm going to be passing away anytime soon, but I'm like, man, what are thoughts that like, or and it happens more serendipitously than you could imagine. You'll have an amazing idea for a song, or if you're an artist, you'll have this amazing idea. Maybe you had the idea of duct taping a banana to the wall, and you're like, that would be awesome, and then it happens, and it's because, but it happens months later, and it's like, oh, had I just acted on that idea, and I believe in the law of attraction. So when you manifest something like that and any of these great ideas, it's only a matter of time before someone else like picks up on like, whoa, that's a great idea. I'm gonna go actually do it though.
For someone who like is thinking about it as an ideas person, right? And for people out there, like how do you choose which ideas to act on for folks that like have the ideas but aren't sure how to commit to them?
Such as,
Like I guess if you're like in the block between like having the thought and doing it, like what is the, or what would you tell someone to kind of motivate them to get out of their own way?
oh, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think with the idea of just repetitively doing something, even kind of how we talked about daily practices,
Mm.
doing something every day that maybe you don't see any immediate gratification for it, but it'll build up eventually. And most things will snowball. And at the same time, if you I think, and like in my experience, I still continue to practice because I think I'm honestly making progress. And I think I'm going to practice up until hopefully the day I die. And and I think the idea of like having that great thought and acting on it and being like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do it. I think a lot of it comes down to fear of failure.
Mm.
And I am reminded of a really good quote, which is do not judge me by my successes, but judge me by how many times I failed and I didn't give up. Because, every successful person, everybody is self-made, but only the successful admit it.
That's so real. Yeah, it's so powerful. And I think about that all the time, because we often, especially with media and stuff, we only see people once they've made it. And it's so easy to forget that that person probably had four businesses that failed before they started the one that made $1 million, or they probably wrote hundreds of songs before they put the seven out in an album or the EP that, got the first 100,000 listens. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's so much value and understanding that comes when you start to pursue the thing that makes sense for you, whether that's like music or for me with video stuff. Um, how much time and effort goes into it to know like Jimi Hendrix didn't get there overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like how many years of daily practice. And um, it's something that it's so difficult and you don't see the reward of for like oftentimes like literally years,
Right.
especially if you pick it up like later in your life. But I love that message, and I think I totally agree with it where it's like it's never too late to start something. The important thing is starting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone starts somewhere. Ground zero. If you want to write a song and you don't even know how to play guitar, just write out your thoughts. And it could be something as silly as like I went grocery shopping and I bought milk. That could be a song lyric. That
Yeah.
I went to the grocery store to buy milk. I saw someone across the alleyway that I've never seen before. How we can think of our life in, sheet like silk. Um, it was the 4th of July and how I wanted more. Something, you could start off with something as like rudimentary as that, which is like, that was just me describing going to the store. And I didn't even go to the store and see someone that day, but it could be something you saw someone in their car and you're like, whoa, that person, wonder what kind of a life that person has. And
Mm.
start thinking about things differently that way. Start thinking about things sense based. How would something taste? This plant. How would this plant taste? And then you're like, well, maybe not this one, but I know eucalyptus or something.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so beautiful. I have loved this conversation, especially because of how much it seems like you bring a lot of like joy and excitement to all of these concepts too. And I guess there's a piece of that sometimes I feel like I lose a bit. And it's really beautiful to be reminded of like also pivot to what is exciting to a
Mm-hmm.
degree within like your realm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's about that balance, kind of like how you were mentioning earlier about balancing the photography that
Mm.
like you absolutely love and then the photography that's like contracted and pays bills type of a thing. And it's the same thing with music. Sometimes I'm doing cover band music and none of it's original works, but it's making money.
Mm.
So and it kind of fuels the other stuff where like I'm like, oh, I want to make like an avant-garde hip hop trance psychedelic, indie band album or something, which I'm like putting together an album like that.
Oh,
and
epic.
and oh yeah, it's like a lot of hip hop kind of, but it's it is interesting how all that works and ties together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess a piece of that too. It's like not always joy and excitement, but to balance it also with if you're like processing. I guess it depends on who you are, but also processing the heavier emotions at times is important and all of that stuff. But I guess no matter what it is, it's maybe the act of creating that is like the root of the core of being like an artist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think to me, being an artist is. I have a friend, is Alaska Daddy is his name, or like it's not his nickname, but once we were all hanging out and he threw his shoe across the room, like his left shoe, and I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "That's art," and I was like, I didn't understand. I was like, "Man, I gotta go home. It's late." Like, and And I think art is whatever we feel that came out of us that is gonna somehow be like left in the temporal lobe of any kind of form, whether that's visual or audio or culinary arts. I love, all the arts are just amazing. I'm trying to dive deeper into all of them now. I actually went to the first Friday last night and actually walked around and looked at a bunch of artwork that I could probably never afford in like the next 5 years, but
Very cool. And it's funny too because it contributes to um, all of the pieces, especially sensory wise, that can then maybe change the way that you're talking about your own pieces, right? Or like the way that you write a lyric might be impacted by the shades of color on a certain painting because you've never seen a sky with that specific green or something like this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh man, it's so so beautiful. Thank you for taking the time. These conversations are like such an absolute joy to me to like these rabbit holes and like I just really appreciate like you being willing to come and field all my like questions and kind of dive into art and artists and I guess who you are. So yeah, just really grateful for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sage. This was awesome.
Is there any projects upcoming that you would want to give a shout out to or a plug to?
Yeah, I mean, just I'm hoping I will be having an album out by April.
Sweet.
Yeah.
On which your personal project or
yeah, that'll be under Paul Streichan. Yeah, that'll be some indie kind of that hip hop kind of. It's all over the place. But I'll hopefully have it out by April. Yeah.
Cool. I'm stoked to listen to it, and then when it does drop, I'll add it to the description of this podcast and stuff. So the last piece is if you could, you're gonna field one more question. For those of you who don't know, this is a book that a notebook that I pass around. The person that was on the podcast last writes the question for you to answer, and then you'll have a chance to write your own question to pass on to the next person. The question that they wrote was, what is one strange thing you do to maintain a connection to self, mental health, and work or work clarity?
One strange thing?
Yeah.
I try to say yes to life as much as I can. I think of the movie Yes Man. There's limits to it. I won't, if someone's, like want to go like jump off a cliff without a parachute, I'm like, no. But I try to say yes to more things in life, especially things that maybe I'm already just shut off to. And that could be as simple as someone recommending me a book. And I'm like, oh, great, I'll give that a listen, instead of, and knowing darn well in my mind that I'm just going to be like, forget about it. So, now I'll get a book recommendation or something. I'll write it in my phone. I'll buy it on Amazon right then and there. I'm like, sweet, it's only $15 or something,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Saying yes more. I dig it.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Paul.
I was a friend of mine.